That's 2 for 2. 2 great episodes in a row. Hey everyone, Ryan Reed here, and today we are talking about the second episode of the 2021 season of Are You Afraid of the Dark, the reboot. The season is called Curse of the Shadows. And I gotta say, I was really impressed with last week's episode. I was even more impressed with this week's episode. Now, if you haven't seen episode 2 of Curse of the Shadows yet, like last week, definitely go check that video out, or that episode out first, or check out my review first if you want to just kind of see what I thought about it, and then come back to this video because I will be talking about some minor spoilers. Now, to kick things off, this is absolutely a fantastic second episode. I have some minor issues with it, but overall, 2 for 2, they've created 2 fantastic episodes of Are You Afraid of the Dark, and it feels like they finally got the series back on track. And I gotta say, yet again, they did a fantastic job. So much so that I took a ton of notes on just the things that I really liked. First of all, everything with the Shadow Man is fantastic this episode. I think I talked about it last week, but in case I didn't, they took inspiration apparently from the creature from Dead Man's Float, which is one of my favorite episodes of Are You Afraid of the Dark of all time. And it really shows. The creature design is really fantastic. It's scary. It doesn't hold back on the effects, the way that the face looks, very like skeletal, and its silhouette is just really well done. There are moments when it's just it's just so good. I can't even think about, like, I'm trying to form a sentence here. There are moments where the effects in the episode are so simple and so well done, but that's a good thing. They're executed fantastically in their simplicity. A good example is, unfortunately, I don't remember a lot of character names this season. There's a few I remember, but so that's kind of a bummer. But anyway, that's beside the point. There's a moment where one of the characters is out for a run at night, and she keeps seeing the Shadow Man pop up at different corners. That's a really simple effect. Obviously, it's just multiple people in suits. That would be the easiest way to do it. Or it's cuts within pans. But it works so well. It's so creepy that he's just slightly out of focus in a lot of these shots, and you can just kind of see him there, like waiting and being terrifying and stalking, and it's really well done. There are some nods that seem like they're kind of nods to Nightmare on Elm Street. I know I mentioned that last week, but there's a scare in this episode where someone starts getting pulled into their bed. And that's total Nightmare on Elm Street. It feels like an homage. It doesn't feel like they're just ripping it off. But like, probably because of how this creature works, they're like, they can't really avoid those comparisons to Freddy Krueger. But again, yeah, that dream sequence works really well. My favorite one is when the character of Jay is reading a comic, and all of a sudden, what he's reading in the comic starts happening to him, and we get those same shots frame by frame, and the tension builds really well, and it's a really simple scare at the end. We see in the comic a hand coming out of a box. He sees the box, he goes over to it, and the box rattles. And that's it. Again, we're talking about a show on Nickelodeon, so they're not going to go, too intense or too gory or anything like that. But I will say, these scares are so effectively crafted. It's phenomenal. All of the elements of the Shadow Man I really dig, and he is a legitimately scary villain, which is nice. I talked about it last week a little bit, but I never really felt that dread in Carnival of Doom. Here, holy cow, they do a really great job with that. Plus, I really liked the twist with the time zones and the Twilight being the thing that caused them all to become cursed. At first, when I first heard that, I was like, that's a little silly. But then it made total sense, because I was like, oh yeah, of course. Like, Twilight being, when the sun has already gone down, but you still have light in the sky, and it being about time. It makes total sense, and it works, because then you don't have the issue of something like a movie like Gremlins, which I love, but Gremlins is all about don't feed them after midnight, but it's like, well, what midnight? Midnight where we are, midnight, like that. You start kind of breaking it down, you're like, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Here, they explain that. They're legitimately just like, we're in a time zone where the sun has already started to go down. So because we walked into the woods during twilight when technically the sun's already down, he cursed us. Super great twist, super great explanation, and it works really well for the story. It kind of propels our characters forward in a way that, again, kind of grounds it in the logic of the real world, which I think works. Now, this episode does have some problems. This episode feels like it's pulling a few scripting issues from last season. And I didn't really feel that with episode 1. This episode, at the beginning, I felt that a little bit more. For example, the principal is written really lame. Like, she's like talking about like the Breakfast Club and like the jokes just feel out of place. There's a, how do I put this with big family friendly? There's a really weird joke at the beginning of this episode based on the character of Luke, our kind of main character, I guess, looking at his computer and his dad's reaction. And it's like, this feels weird and out of place for this show. I don't know why they felt the need to include that in there. And there's some other dialogue throughout the episode that just kind of feels lame. I mean, I hate to say it like that because these are minor things. The rest of the episode is so good, and most of the time the characters are really well written. There's out of nowhere, apparently Luke likes Hannah, who's the like activist girl, and we get like glimpses of that, of him like, and it's like, well, I didn't see anything of that in episode 1. They were just friends. Why all of a sudden does he feel like, oh, I kind of like her? It's like that. Those type of things feel like they kind of crept in from season 1. There's also a plot point about somebody who has a learner's permit, like taking a car and driving to go help friends. And that also is directly from the first season. There's also a moment why I wondered why they wouldn't have called the police already. But then they actually bring that up. They address it in the best way they can. I mean, again, you're talking about logic of Are You Afraid of the Dark, where kids are being chased down by this, shadow man monster and everything like that. So it's, you kind of have to let that reality element kind of like step aside. But there's a certain point where at the beginning it definitely feels like, well, they're just trying to find their lost friend who's missing. Why wouldn't they have called the police at this point? And then they try to kind of be like, well, it's the Shadow Man. And then they actually, Luke says, oh, it's the Shadow Man. And nobody believes him, which I like. Nobody immediately was like, oh, yeah, we gotta stop him. Everybody was like, that doesn't make any sense. There's no such thing as the Shadow Man. And then they start kind of breaking down their own experiences they've been having lately. And you know what? For getting the plot moving, to continue everything going on, it's fine. It works fine. That's a minor nitpick. That's me being like, why wouldn't they call the police? And then like all they gotta do is each tell like a little story, and suddenly they all believe the Shadow Man is a real thing, and they're not gonna call the police. But again, I think they actually handled that way better than they could have. They could have just completely left it out, and so I really applaud the writers for actually addressing that and being like, yeah, no, they probably should try to call the police, or at least explain why they couldn't call the police. So I think that's really well done. There's also a kind of a discovery late in the episode where everybody realizes like, oh my gosh, the Shadow Man doesn't like light. And it's like, didn't you figure that out already? I mean, it feels a little late for them to kind of figure that out in the episode. Again, that's me being nitpicky. If you're watching this video, just know I really, really like this episode. But that was just like one little moment where I'm like, every time the Shadow Man comes to attack you, if lights get flipped on, he goes away. You guys wouldn't have figured that out already. Plus, his name's the Shadow Man. Like, he deals in the shadows. It would make sense that he wouldn't like light. But again, that's me overthinking a Nickelodeon anthology TV show. That's applying my real world logic to it. So again, little minor thing, but it does lead to a really cool scene where the Midnight Society is all gathered together and they're all fighting him off with different forms of light. We get this really cool kind of like panning around the group Avengers style shot. And you know what? It was worth it for that scene alone, because the scene really, really works. If they had to discover it late in the episode to make that work, that's fine. Again, a lot of this stuff I'm talking about, these minor kind of issues I have with the episode, that's all they are. They're minor. I was watching the episode, still really enjoying it. I was very glad to see that some of those writing issues that I kind of had a little bit did not creep their way into the entire episode, that they were just little hints of it, and it seemed like, maybe they were kind of leftovers from the first season again, and they kind of like sprinkled them in, but the rest of the season so far has been so much stronger that if those are minor things, I'm not going to complain about it. I still had a blast watching this episode. On top of that, there's just some other great stuff, little simple scares. Like I said, Shadow Man's like shadow just appearing on the wall and like walking past stuff like that. It's so well done. You can tell that the show probably didn't have the world's biggest budget, but they do everything they can with very little. And I'm a huge fan of that. I love films and movies and TV shows and programs and YouTube stuff, all kinds of things that do so much with very little. I'm a huge advocate of that. I'm a huge advocate of people doing a lot with the resources that they have, because you can do a lot more than you think you can with having very little in terms of effects and budget and things like that. And so I really applaud them for that, because this episode is super effective and it's very, very, very well done. And it makes me look forward to the next episode. You know, by the second episode of Carnival of Doom, I was like, I guess I'll see episode 3 because I want to see this to the end. No, Curse of the Shadows, I'm like all in. I'm like, what's going to happen next? They seem to imply that Sardau's going to come back, which is great. A lot of good stuff. I'm really looking forward to what happens next. Also, a lot of cool references in this episode as well. There's a Shandu reference, which is like really obscure as far as Are You Afraid of the Dark goes. There's also a Tale of the Quicksilver reference, which was kind of weird because they're talking about Connor, I think his name is, the guy that they're trying to find who's been missing. He told a werewolf story, and they say, oh yeah, Tale of the Quicksilver. And I was like, that's an episode, isn't it? And I quickly looked it up again. I was like, yeah, no, that's totally different plot. It has nothing to do with the werewolves. It has to do with like a demon and like a magic amulet and things like that. So calling this tale he told Tale of the Quicksilver makes a lot more sense to me, since it's a werewolf thing. But I mean, ultimately that could still be a reference, or whoever wrote this just didn't realize that was an episode title. Could be either way. But again, another cool little thing. Overall, episode 2, Curse of the Shadows, just as good, if not better, than the first episode. A few minor things that I didn't like, but we do get to start see our characters be even more well-rounded. We do see the connections that they all have. We do see the friendships that they all share. There's a cool scene where we do see kind of the roles that each plays in the Midnight Society broken down via like a comic book cover. And I thought it was a really fun, simple way to explain kind of who our characters are in each group, without having to dive into it like a backstory or, you know, make them broad characters like season 1 did and stuff like that. So really, really, really well done. Effectively scary. Overall good characters. A little bit of iffy writing sometimes, but majority of the script is fantastic. And it just keeps moving along. I'm really excited to see how this thing wraps up. It makes me feel like, even though it's different, you know, from the original series, it makes me feel like I'm watching that again. They're not holding back on the scares. They're not talking down to the audience. They're telling a scary story. It just happens to be a scary story, you know, on Nickelodeon. And so I really, really, really respect that. And I can't wait till the 3rd episode. But if you want to get caught up on all things Are You Afraid of the Dark, this current reboot, you can watch my other impromptu reviews. I did one last week about the first episode. I also did a bunch about Carnival of Doom that you can watch. You can also watch Fright Films, which is my horror movie analytical show. I talk about all things horror across all sorts of decades, across all sort of forms. I have some Nickelodeon episodes. If you haven't checked those out, check out my Hey Arnold episode, check out my Zeke the Plumber episode, and hopefully soon, I can't say when, but hopefully soon I might have some more Hey Arnold Fright Films episodes in the near future. You can also check out some of my creepy artwork videos, all kinds of stuff on the channel. So if you like this video and you want to see more, give it a like and subscribe to the channel if you can, so I can continue to make more content. And I'll see you guys next time.